Alright folks, how you doing? So in this video I'm going to be reading from the foreword of The Riddle of the Earth by Commons Beaumont. So here we go. Foreword. During the past year, 1924, it may have struck many people, besides the writer, that there was something unaccountably wrong with the weather over almost the whole of the northern hemisphere. Particularly was it the case in Western Europe, where, if blessed by the Gulf Stream, the countries contiguous to it, and Great Britain and Ireland in particular, seem to be the dumping ground of all the rain and wind and general depression which the Gulf Stream seems to be able to collect. There was not only no sunshine fit to mention, there were thunderstorms, fitful, sudden, and dangerous throughout the year. There was a tremendous hurricane during the first days of September, and the year 1924, dishonoured and cordially disliked, went out on the wings of a series of astonishing gales and floods. The weather is a subject we all discuss. Even a stiff and canny Scotsman will wax eloquent on the question of the weather. Nor is it surprising, since vast interests are wrapped up in the incidence of weather conditions. Crops may never ripen if there is no stable weather. Livestock fails to thrive, languishes, and gets diseased. Shipping and transport are affected. Boy, do I ever know about that. Public arrangements are upset. Not only, indeed, are agriculturalists and producers of almost all commodities hit hard by incessant bad weather, but the whole life of the community is thrown out of gear. As these words are being penned, great areas in the Thames Valley and elsewhere are flooded, and the destruction is enormous. Any question of meteorological conditions is one, therefore, which affects one and all of us intimately, directly and indirectly, our health and our pockets. In regard to the weather, another observation is to be made. The commercial centre of the world and the seat of the greatest population amongst the white races is on either side of the Atlantic Ocean. Most of the world's cereals, meat, cotton, and manufactures as yet come from either side of that vast circumfluous ocean's lands, and likewise that same region is cursed with the most eccentric, inconsistent, and unreliable weather conditions in the world. The United States and Canada experience greater extremes of heat waves or cold blasts than is usually the case in the British Isles, owing probably to the action of the Gulf Stream, which has a habit of conducting one disturbance after another to these shores. In spite of the importance of the subject, the astounding fact remains that we do not seem to know anything really about the causes which affect the weather. Expensive weather bureaus and meteorological offices are maintained at the public expense, and they tell us that a disturbance is on the way. They station agents in the Azores, at St. John's, Newfoundland, and elsewhere to report. Sometimes they are right, often they are not. None of these experts appear to possess the slightest knowledge of the initial causes which operate to produce sudden and violent disturbances of the elements. Presumably they are aware that both air and water are condensed gases, but why air and sea exist is one of these matters people take for granted, although the moon, which is a planet, has neither. There is reason to suppose that the oceans and seas are gradually increasing in volume. Where is the water coming from? Nay, where has it all come from? We are expected to believe that the lands of the earth's surface have been thrown up at different periods from a molten interior, but it can scarcely be maintained that all the water of all the oceans and seas and lakes and rivers was also ejected in this manner, and that they have provided us with our needs ever since that day some millions of years ago. Where did all the water come from that has loosened over most of Europe between December the 26th, 1924, and January the 3rd, 1925? A series of astounding gales in which millions of tons of water were flung down upon millions of square miles of land and sea. The meteorologists do not tell us that. They probably do not think it is their concern, but if they knew more about the causes of weather disturbance, it would perhaps enable them to assist the peoples on either side of the Atlantic instead of the meteorological office being, as at present, more of a poor joke than anything else. The vast scale or series of gales, which began with no premonitory warnings on December the 26th, 1924, and continued until January the 3rd, 1925, indicated that somehow there had been introduced into our atmosphere vast quantities of hydrogen and oxygen which had condensed. Those who have studied meteors and are aware of their constituent qualities were supplied with a solution to the mystery when it appeared that in Rome, on about December the 26th, a great meteor had been observed flashing past the Earth. It was estimated to have been as big as the Moon and very nearly struck the Earth. British astronomers remained quite unaffected by this announcement. Greenwich Observatory, when interviewed, doubted the accuracy of the alleged size of the meteor, and apparently regarded any collision with the stoic indifference of superior knowledge. American astronomers who are concentrating on the study of meteors and comets took it seriously, and the American press discussed the great meteor. It was probably a celestial object discovered by Dr. Bade of Bergendorf at the end of October 1924 and pronounced by Greenwich to be a minor planet, which Dr. Crommelin discovered complacently had an orbit that brought nearer to the Sun than any planet except perhaps Eros. Morning Post, October the 31st, 1924. Dr. Crommelin may be right, but a strange round cometary object implies something coming towards us, and while the meteor will probably go nearer to the Sun than Eros, it apparently came near to putting a great part of the Earth out of business for a considerable time, as it left behind as a New Year's gift some of its gases which were attracted into our atmosphere. They condensed, and hence the storms and gales. In a word, weather phenomena is involved with other natural phenomena. Gales, hurricanes, typhoons, landslides, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, meteors and comets are all co-related. It is surprising, in review of the interest millions of educated people take today in every form of science, that these great subjects such as volcanoes and earthquakes, as well as comets and meteors, are allowed to be placed on a shelf. To those who have studied these matters, and it is inexplicable that otherwise well-informed people accept without question the archaic ideas produced by supposed authorities, such as that a volcano is thrown up from the Earth's interior, and an eruption is the escape of a molten rock through a fault in the crust, that an earthquake is caused by a contraction if the Earth's crust due to the slowly cooling incandescent mass below, and that comets and meteors are to all intents and purposes harmless. Such was the teachings in the smug Victorian period, and it still survives today in regard to these subjects, much as it was in Herodotus' time. Anyone who said the world was round was likely enough to be boiled alive, or as in the time of the popes prior to the 15th century, anyone who dared assert that there was land on the other side of the Atlantic stood in danger of excommunication. Archaic doctrines long survive the intelligence, if the contemporaneous masses, but sooner or later they must go. Generally, the accepted experts in each branch of learning stick to their last and leave severely alone other preserves. Weather experts take no account of volcanic eruptions or earthquakes, although both produce heavy rains and cold weather. Volcanoes, in turn, are very closely concerned with earthquakes, and both are inseparable from meteor falls and the meteor streams which intersect the Earth's orbit periodically. Meteors are the disintegrated fragments of comets, and these in their turn have a very direct bearing upon natural catastrophes, both great and small, and are the original causes, there is good reason to believe, of the vast geological changes which have resulted in the continents and islands, oceans and seas as they are today. It is time there was a revision of all these forms of natural science. In this little work, which does not pretend to be exhaustive, or indeed more than suggestive, the writer attempts to indicate an entirely new theory, or indeed a return to the very old and classic beliefs on the subject of the creation of the lands and seas on this planet. The key to the true understanding of these matters is contained in the volcano. A volcano, it is suggested, is in reality the residue of another world, the deposit of a meteor, which contains all of the Earth's ingredients. Volcanoes follow a general law, or rather meteors obeying an impulse which brings them towards the Earth from the direction of the magnetic pole. When they strike the Earth, fall along certain isodynamic lines, where the lines, if volcanoes stretch in any given direction from, say, southeast to northwest, or from east to west, or from northeast to southwest, as at present is the direction of the ecliptic pole, so at one time that part of the Earth was the position of the then North Pole. By a series of huge dumpings of deposits by means of tremendous impacts was age after age built up, and by the linear direction of volcanoes extinct or alive can a prior period of the world's history be identified. Such is the theory advanced. It is shown how these meteor deposits, volcanoes, gradually cool and die out like a fire unless they are renovated by other meteor impacts which may strengthen and increase them, as is the case with many volcanoes. An active volcano, it is pointed out, attracts the wandering meteor, and hence an active volcano in a state of eruption is always a danger to all within its vicinity. Yet all these have their uses. Without volcanoes to draw them in, we should not attract so many meteors, and the earth would languish and gradually lose its air and sea. We require a new and untrampled attitude upon these questions of great purport, and in placing this little book in the hands of the public, the author, conscious of its defects, hopes nevertheless that it may be received on its merits, and the arguments he advances be weighed dispassionately without prejudice. In that event, we will have little cause to fear the result. Thanks are due to Mr. Charles E. Elmhurst of the Museum, York on Sick, of the Yorkshire Philosophical Society, and to that body, as also to Mr. John Murray of Albemarle Street for according permission to use photographs taken by the late Dr. Tempest Anderson, FRS, and for his series of volcanic studies in many lands, published by Messrs. Murray in 1917. The late Dr. Anderson's photographs of volcanoes, which he took in all parts of the world, remain the most valuable record of pictorial volcanic art in existence. Appian Way, March 1925.